Also, around that same time, or a little later, another thing had taken place that added to some of my knowledge in that area. Was one of the professors at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, Manji Abedi, Professor Abedi, I should say. He had been talking to some folks that he knew over in the UAE, I believe, the Emirates at that time, about a big job that they had of several thousand reels of different types of tape, not just quad, but many different things, but a lot of quad. And so then, having a lot of quad, they had sort of an inkling, I suppose, that it was going to take a lot of heads to get through the job that they had in front of them. And so somehow or other he found my name, or somebody told him about me, or I don't know, but anyway, we connected. And so we talked about that for several months and looked at his project and ways that it could be done and different things. And the one thing that or maybe the two things I should say, that came out of all that was beneficial to me, which, by the way, I never did get to do any work for those folks, because what they were wanting done I couldn't have ever done anyway. You know, just logistically I couldn't have done it with the travel and all. So I was never a good option for any of that anyway, but it was an interesting thing to explore. And but what I did take away from all that benefited me in the tip work was, well, number one, Professor Beatty, he was knew a lot of other people in his circles that were materials scientists and other very highly educated people, in metallurgy or metallurgical science, engineering, and so I was able to get a few of my questions answered as far as the materials science of ferrite, things like that. That heretofore was very, very hard to come by. And that was kind of a dead end until I started working with the professor, and asking him questions about the metallurgy and the materials science. And the other thing that brought about the meeting with the professor was reconnecting with Bev Gooch. And Bev had worked at Ampex for 40 or 42 years, I forget, 40 I think. But before that, he had worked, in Nashville in the early mid-50s. He's far from Nashville, Tennessee. And he grew up in Nashville at the time when all the studios were being organized and starting to take form, you know, in the early mid-50s. Well, he had a little TV repair shop going in Nashville out of high school. And, you know, I guess being a young 18-year-old or however old he was, he was really into, you know, on top of everything that was going on, you know, the changes. And so he was friends with, or became friends over time with the, you know, the main people there in town, with Owen Bradley, Chester Atkins, Jim Denny, you know, I guess you'd call them the architects of the Nashville studios and all that. And he had even helped build some of the studios and maintain some of the equipment. So he was into that. And on the side, he had built a video recorder in the early 50s, about the same time Ampex was engaged in their, you know, their project. And so, of course, Ampex ultimately won out, you know, with Quadruplex, the better design. And so that was the way that all went. But he had built this thing on his own, and even though he lost out to Ampex, later on the Brush Corporation, I believe, bought all of his patents and hired him. So he went to work for Brush in the late 50s, and I believe they were going to utilize his patents as instrumentation recorders. So he worked for Brush for a couple of years, and I think he went to work at Ampex in '62, you know, and so he was at Ampex from '62 on to about 2000 or 2001. So, and of all things, what's he in? The head engineering department. Head designs. And of all luck, you know, being from Tennessee, when he retired from Ampex, they didn't waste any time leaving California and moving back to Tennessee. And so here was Bev sitting right here, you know, practically next door. You know, the guy that had held probably more patents on head designs than any guy alive. I think he either authored or co-authored 36 head design patents over his career, or maybe more than that. But I think the ones that were published on the Tennessee State Museum said 36 head patents. So if there's anybody to ask about a head, he was the guy. And so getting in with the professor's project and working with him, that brought us around to Bev Gooch. And meeting with Bev, and even though our friends' work at the with the Emirates didn't go anywhere, it at least for me, it started me back working with Bev, and that's probably the best thing that ever happened to me in the head building work was studying with Bev Gooch. He'd been there and he'd done it, and he'd seen it all and could tell you every little detail, you know, about everything. And so I spent several years working with Bev, and you know, there's no way you could ever learn everything a guy like Bev knows. It'd take you another lifetime, you know, to do that. But I did my best and took a lot of notes and shot a lot of videos, and we hit the high spots as best we could, you know, as far as the tip itself. And that's the thing, that's the big mystery, is the tip. You know, head. The head assembly, anybody can learn how to build a video head. That's all mechanical stuff. And it's, you know, pretty well straightforward. You can teach somebody how to put the pieces together. You know, that's no problem there. The problem and the mystery comes when you have to make a tip. And of course, Bev was just good as gold, you know, in that department. And so that's what we really focused in on, was the tip fabrication, the specifications, the facts and the figures. And, you know, what it boils down to is just that, specifications. If you know what it is you're trying to do and you can write it down, draw a picture, draft drawings, you know, and put your tolerances in, and if you know what you're going to make it from, then you can take all of that to a competent machinist, you know, that's competent or capable of working in micro machining, or, well, in our case, ferrites, soft ferrites. Then any competent machine person, you take them the specs and the materials, they're going to be able to make it. That's machining 101. You know, there ain't no mystery there. Now, if they haven't ever done it before, there may be some practice, a learning curve, you know, for them. But once you know, get past all that, it's kind of a routine thing. And so that's where Bev was instrumental in my work, was he was able to bring some order to my thought processes, and at the same time give me some history and some background, you know, into what some of this stuff was and where it came from, and you know why it is the way it is. And you know, that's the one thing, if I can't do anything else other than that, is maybe just to maybe a little more better educate people on what it is, you know, to make a video head tip. If I can do that one thing, I think I've probably served a good purpose, is to educate people on how to make these things. You know, because there may be a time, and who's to say, it may not be long off, to where there will not be anybody else around that's willing and able to make or refurbish or rebuild a 2-inch quadruplex head assembly. And you know, it's good now. You have a company there in California that's doing it. But you know how fortunes shift, technology changes, and who's to say in the future they may have to go in a different direction to stay in business. You know, and they may abandon their 2-inch work. So, yeah, it's always good to have a plan B, you know, as the old saying goes. So anyway, I was working with Bev and learning all about this, and we had talked to several different places that could do certain things with ferrite, and George Schaller, his name comes to mind. He worked at the magnetic place up in, used to be in New Jersey. I think they moved to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. It's Applied Magnetics or Allied Magnetics. I'd have to look it up again. I forgot what their name was, but they were the people that were hot pressing the ferrite, the manganese zinc bricks. And he had, you know, been around for 40 years doing that work, I guess, or longer. And so he was able to explain a lot of that to me, what they did, and even some of their specs are out on their website, you know, the granular structure, granularity and density and all this stuff. And so George there was able to coach me a little bit as far as the manganese zinc ferrite that they produce. So I bought a block of that. I think it was $580. And we were at that time talking to a place up in Michigan. I think their name was Globe Magnetics. Kevin Cunningham. And he had figured it all out to where he could make, I believe, 3,700 pieces from our little block. And you know, you have the front and the back. You have the 2 pole pieces. And the one is just a rectangle, and the other one has a little notch cut in it. You know, that's your winding window. And he had figured it all out and allowed for the saw and all this stuff, and he figured out that he could get 3,700 pieces, pole pieces, out of that one block. Well, 3,700 divided by 2. That's what, about 1,800 tips. And he was going to do all that work for, I think, around $4,000. And that included lapping to within plus and minus 2 micro inches flatness. And they didn't do that there, but there was a place in town that could do it to that spec, plus and minus 2 micro inches flatness. And so for around $5,000, we would wind up with 3,700 pole pieces, which is roughly 1,800 tips, the 2 pieces. And all we needed to do then was to glass bond them to join the 2 together. And so we had that out on the table, and as one route or route to go. And then there was a fellow that I had found up in New Hampshire, Jack Bradshaw, who had done glass bonding for the folks at Digital Equipment Corporation at one time or the other. And so he had the brazing rods and the vacuum furnace, and he had done it before, and he was, game to try what we were wanting to do. And so Jack was, the guy that was going to try to do the glass bonding. Either that, or he had offered to sell me the furnace and the rods, and I would do it myself, or try to, or learn how to, or whatever it was going to take. So we were working on all that, and then just once I found a place in the UK that had done it, but were no longer doing it. They weren't really sure whether they wanted to do it or not. And so my friend over in the UK, David Dean, he didn't live too far from their plant, which was in Shepperton in the UK. So one day he took a video head and got in his car and just drove over there to the place and walked in the door and talked to the man. And after they saw, and he explained what we actually wanted done, and they agreed to do the whole thing. And one of their guys, of all luck, he used to do video tips about 20 years ago, and he agreed to come out of retirement and work on our project for us. And so that was quite a stroke of luck right there, and if it hadn't been for David Dean going over there in his car with a video head one day. That would have never happened. So, you know, hats off to David for getting the ball rolling, finally. So here we had found a place that could make the tips and do the bonding. And here I'd done a job in Palquad for Shay, and I made the money that could pay for all this work to be done, all this development work. And so here we went. We went off to make some tips. And make 'em he did. Bob Mellers was the guy's name. And you know, he wanted to work with us, and you know, and do it to our satisfaction. In other words, make what I wanted to make. And you see, that goes back to the early days when I was using, you know, different heads with different wire patterns to get a better playback out of a problem tape. You know, and my desire to want to make my own tips so I could make them, you know, the profile that I thought that would work better for certain things. So I want you to get that. If you don't get anything else, you know, understand that, you know, one size does not fit all when it comes to making tips for video heads for preservation work. It does make a difference. And so that's what I really wanted to do, aside from being able to rebuild my own heads and just, you know, get completely away from any outside or third party dependence. You know, that in itself was nice enough, but the other part of the problem for me was I wanted to make a tip like I wanted it made, not the way somebody else that didn't know anything about preservation work wanted to make a tip. So that's really was at the top of my list right there, and I want you to understand that if you don't understand anything else. And so Bob, he agreed to make the tips the way we wanted to make them, within certain, you know, parameters. I mean, he wasn't going to make something that wasn't structurally reliable. You know, we weren't going to do that anyway. But so we worked on that, and came up with what I believe was the strongest tip that I could ever make, put it that way. And we could go down another rabbit hole there if you wanted to get into the bonding and apart from the design, you know, but the bonding was another question about